During my first year as an undergrad student, I had absolutely no idea what philosophy was. So I signed up for it during my first year, and it really didn't take long for me to figure out that philosophy is what I wanted to do. But even so, I expect a lot of students start college not even really knowing what philosophy is or what it's about. So in this video, I'm just going to say a little bit about what philosophy is, and then just a bit about why it matters. Starting off really easy, if we just look at the word itself, the word philosophy, it just means love of wisdom. So philosophers are people who love wisdom. Now this automatically raises all sorts of questions. What does it mean to love something? What is wisdom? What is the nature of wisdom? And those are all really good philosophical questions. So to answer the question of what does it mean to love wisdom, we have to start doing philosophy. For the time being though, I suggest that we just think about the love of wisdom as being something like a deepened understanding of and a deepened appreciation of what's true and what's good. It's about getting a better understanding of who we are as human beings and what our world is like. So philosophers love to ask questions like, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a good human being? Or what does it mean to live a good life? Is there some deeper meaning to our lives? Or is the only meaning in our life the type of meaning that we ourselves create? And when I say the love of wisdom involves deepening your understanding and appreciation for what's good and what's true, some people might react to that and say, well, what's good and what's true, it's all relative, right? It's just up to the individual to decide for themselves. So you have your good, I have my good, you have your truth, I have my truth. But that itself is a philosophical position. It's a kind of relativism. It's a particular school of thought in philosophy. And so it needs a defense. You can't just say, well, you have your truth and I have my truth, because that itself is a claim about truth generally. So these are the sorts of things that philosophers like to talk about. Or to put it a little bit differently, asking questions about whether there is even such a thing as truth, or whether there's such a thing as moral goodness, or even if there's such a thing as human nature. All of those are philosophical questions. To get an even better understanding of what philosophy is about, I suggest that we cut it into 4 major subcategories. The categories are metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic. And even though these subcategories tend to overlap all the time, it's helpful to talk about each one individually so that we can get a better picture of what professional philosophers do. So starting off with metaphysics. If you've ever wandered into the metaphysics section of a bookstore, you've probably stumbled across books dealing with how to harness the power of crystals, or whether or not you're a psychic, testing whether or not you're a psychic, or how to communicate with spirits, or books about the power of light. These sorts of things are not really what philosophers are talking about when we are dealing with metaphysics. And unfortunately, even if you do a quick Google search and check out what the definition of metaphysics is, Google specifies that metaphysics deals with abstract theory that has no basis in reality. And again, not so much. Instead, how we should think about metaphysics, I think, is to think about it as the study of being, about the study of what is, what exists. Or maybe even more generally, we could talk about it as the study of the fundamental features of our reality. So questions that fall into metaphysics often include, does God exist, or do gods exist? And if so, what are they like? Does the universe have to have a first cause? Is it even possible for there to be an infinite string of causes going back forever and ever and ever? Or did the universe have to have one point at which it started? Relatedly, metaphysicians will talk about necessity and possibility. So we can ask the question, is it possible that I wore a different shirt today? Yep. But what makes it the case that it's possible? So if you say something is possible, what makes that statement true? Maybe every single event that happens is absolutely necessary. There's no changing anything. This relates into questions about free will. Is it possible for me to decide between different options, or is it the case that no matter what I do, I'm on a fixed track, and I have no real control over changing my decisions? Metaphysicians will ask questions like, what does it mean to be a person? Do you have to have a functioning brain? Do you have to have a mind? Do you have to have a soul? Or do souls even exist? That is, do human beings have souls, or are they just material objects? Metaphysicians will also get into questions about causation and time. And regarding causation, metaphysicians are going to be interested in things like the laws of nature. So what even is a law of nature? Are they things that exist out in the universe, or are they just laws that we've made up? Or what has to be true of our reality for things like science to even work? Can there be uncaused events? Is it the case that something can just happen for no reason whatsoever? Or does every single event that happens have to have some sort of cause? Regarding time, is the present the only moment that exists? Or do the past and the future both exist, they're just not here right now? And if they exist just as much as the present, is it possible to travel to the future? Is it possible to travel to the past? So metaphysicians are super busy. They're doing tons of different work. This just scratches the surface of what they're up to. But if you've ever had questions about what is reality like, or what has to be true in order for science to work, those sorts of questions, then you might be interested in studying metaphysics. Moving on to epistemology, though. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. So a fundamental question would be, what is knowledge, and how do I know when I have it? This relates to the question of what is the difference between knowledge and mere belief? Or we might ask the question, what's the relationship between knowledge and faith? Is it the case that knowledge is some sort of justified belief, where you have lots and lots and lots of evidence to support that belief? Or is it something else altogether? Relatedly, how is it that knowledge connects to our sense perception? Is it the case that my senses are a reliable way of gaining knowledge? Or can my sense perception be mistaken? And is our sense perception reliable at all? Can you trust what you see, or can you trust what you hear to be true? I mean, can you rule out the possibility that you're not just a brain in a vat that's being controlled by a computer simulation, and so everything that you see, everything that you hear and touch, all of that is just a computer feeding input into your brain, telling you that you're feeling and seeing and hearing this stuff, but it's not actually happening? And if you can't rule out that possibility, do you even know anything at all? Epistemologists will also be interested in looking at what counts as sufficient evidence for believing something. This is going to be highly relevant to the natural sciences as well. When can you draw a conclusion from a particular set of data? How good do the data have to be in order to draw a conclusion about, say, a vaccine being effective at preventing a particular infection? How many people do you have to test? What sorts of procedures do you have to go through to get appropriate evidence to justify a belief that this thing actually works? So again, epistemologists are focused on knowledge, but they're also going to be looking at things like belief, evidence, faith. How do all of these things connect? What's the connection between evidence and knowledge? What's the connection between evidence and justification? All of that falls within epistemology. All right, on to ethics. Ethics deals with the study of what's good or what's evil, what's right or what's wrong. It's asking about what are the fundamental truths about our moral or ethical reality. So we begin with this question of, is there even such a thing as objective moral good? Or is what's morally good just up to societies to decide for themselves? They kind of make up their own rules, and whatever they say is what's good for them, but different societies have different rules, different societies have different morals, and it's just relative. Assuming there is such a thing as moral truth, we might ask questions about what are the right consequences to bring about? What are bad consequences? Or what are good character traits that we should try to promote? What makes for a good person? Is being honest, does that make you a good person? Whereas being deceitful, being a liar, does that make you a bad person? We might talk a little bit about what's even the connection between good and evil. Is it the case that there's good and there's evil in the universe, and there are these two equal and opposing forces that are fighting it out all the time? Or does one get priority over the other? Is one more real than the other? So we've got questions about, is there such a thing as objective moral truth? We've got questions about what are good consequences to bring about, what are the right actions to perform, what are good character traits that I might try to embody or try to develop. And to be clear, we might split ethics into three categories. We have on one hand metaethics, where we're dealing with questions about whether there even is such a thing as the good. Normative ethics, which is telling us all about how we ought to live our lives, what we ought to do, the type of people we ought to be. And applied ethics, where we're taking all of those lessons from metaethical theory, normative ethics, and we're applying it in a particular context, like in medicine. Lastly, this gets us to logic. So logic is the study of arguments, or you might think of it as the study of patterns of reasoning. If you want to argue for a particular conclusion, what's the connection between that conclusion and the reasons you give for it? So is it the case that the reasons guarantee that the conclusion is true? Or is it the case that the reasons you give just make it probable that the conclusion is true? Think about any paper that you've ever written where you try to defend a particular thesis. Let the thesis be your conclusion, and then the reasons you give for believing that, those are what we call your premises. So you give a bunch of reasons for believing this particular thesis. What's the connection between those reasons you give and this particular conclusion that you're trying to convince people to believe? But all that being said, just to recap, we talked about metaphysics as being a sort of study of being, or the study of the fundamental features of our reality. Epistemology was about the study of knowledge. So we looked at knowledge, belief, evidence, how those things all connect. Ethics was the study of what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil. And logic is the study of arguments, specifically the structures of arguments. And you put all this stuff together, and this is what philosophers are doing. So we're studying what are the fundamental features of our reality. What is our reality like? And who are we? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a good person? We're asking questions about how do you know any of this stuff as well? So how can we know the difference between good and evil? And what sorts of arguments are going to get us at what's true? So this ties us back into this idea that philosophy is about getting a better understanding, a deeper understanding of what's true and what's good. Philosophers in the pursuit of wisdom are not just trying to get a better understanding of who or what we are, but what is our world like? What is our universe like? It deals with what you might call the big questions in life. And what this means then is that philosophy is relevant to everyone. We all ask questions about what's right and what's wrong, or about what's our place in the universe. Is there any meaning to life? But beyond that, philosophy is going to offer tons of practical skills as well. Being able to discern between fake news and real news, right? Which news sources are reliable sources of knowledge, or which news sources give you justified belief in particular claims versus those that don't? What are the methods being used that get us reliable information? All of that falls within philosophy to some extent or another. So the question isn't really whether to do philosophy or not, it's whether you're going to do philosophy well or not, because there's just no way to avoid doing it.